Good morning. Thanks for coming. My name is Rich Dana. I'm the UCS coordinator for the Iowa Seed Coalition's Energy and Agriculture program. And on behalf of the Union of Concerned Scientists and Seed, I would like to welcome you to this, which is the first in our series of public meetings. Apart from my activities promoting renewable energy and energy conservation at these meetings, and as the president of the Iowa Renewable Energy Association, my wife Eric and I own Catnip Farm, a little 5-acre diversified farm and organic farm in Iowa County. We produce eggs, honey, catnip, and a variety of vegetables for CSA customers and the Iowa City Farmers Market. Sustainable farming and renewable energy have been our two passions, and when UCS asked me to help out with this project, I was happy to oblige. I've always felt that clean energy production could be a key component to a new diversified farm economy that might help Iowa's family farms preserve our agricultural way of life. I knew Fairfield would be a great place to kick off this series. Area farmers are renowned for their progressive endeavors in organic production and biomass projects, but I was initially frustrated in booking the meeting here. I found it nearly impossible to find a weekend when I was not in conflict with a farming workshop, class, or SEIOA meeting. And that's a good thing. It's great to see an area with so many active farmers, and you're setting a great example for farmers everywhere. Fairfield is also ahead of the curve in small renewable energy systems. People in the area have been making wind and solar power part of their everyday life for years here now. The residents of Fairfield should be very proud of their efforts. I had great support from our sponsors and local volunteers. I'd like to say thank you for your help in making this happen in such a short period of time. And special thanks to Phil Scott and Francis Tickey for really helping me get this deal off the ground. Thanks, guys. Okay, we'll start with the speakers now. We'll have a question and answer period at the end where you can save your questions, and all 4 speakers will be available for question and answer at the end. So our first speaker is John Sellers. John and his wife Jean own and operate a 520-acre farm in northern Wayne County. They have 2 grown sons who have careers off the farm. John is a longtime commissioner serving with Wayne Soil and Water Conservation District. He also serves as a member of the Iowa State Soil Conservation Committee. John is the immediate past president of the Iowa Forage and Grassland Council, serves as producer member of the American Forage and Grassland Council Board of Directors, and serves as chair of the Iowa Farm Bureau Hay and Forage Advisory Committee. John is the field coordinator for Chariton Valley RC&D Biomass Project and is president of Prairie Lands Bio-Products, the Switchgrass producers group cooperating with the Biomass Project. John also serves on the Governor's Energy Task Force. Please welcome John Sellers.
I think you can be pretty far away.
Can you?
Yeah,
okay.
I think you should be all right.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to visit with you this morning. Like Rich said, I'm a farmer, not a public speaker. I've got cow-calf operations, some CRP, a lot of native grasses in our operation. Got a couple hundred acres of switchgrass, big blue, Indian, even some eastern gamma grass. So I was one of the folks that helped get started our project over there in Chariton Valley. We were looking for something, kind of an end game when CRP came out of, the contracts when they expire, plus looking for something. We're right around the Rathbun watershed. We've got Rathbun rural water there. We drink what we do there in our 4 counties. We needed something to kind of build back the infrastructure. Back when we heard an enlightened Secretary of Agriculture say, farm it fence row to fence row, turn it all black. Well, a lot of folks listened, and our cattle industry disappeared. Folks got older, the fences, the facilities are gone, the people are 10 or 15 years older, and they're not going to get back into cattle. We needed an enterprise to try to save the soil, get the water quality stabilized, and try to make some money for our local economy. We looked at several things and came up with switchgrass as bioenergy. We spent a couple, 3 years trying to fill up the slate with partners. And finally, we got to working with Alliant. We got all of our partners in gear, got a DOE grant, and we started in on this. We're working basically with right now we've got about 7,000 acres of switchgrass over there in the 4 counties. That's Wayne, Lucas, Appanoose, and Monroe. We've got that many acres because we are using CRP. It's a spatial project, and we can harvest up to 4,000 acres every year. Well, we are very concerned with wildlife, so we planted more than what we would harvest, so we would only harvest 40 to 60% of each field. So we'd be sure and leave plenty around the edge so that we can continue to build up the wildlife and provide the habitat for them. We just had our first test burn here from December till last part of February. There was one day. What we're trying to do is get 5%, we're replacing 5% of the coal that's burned at the Ottumwa Generating Station. That would amount, on a full year basis, that would amount to 200,000 tons of switchgrass. For our little first test burn, we were going to try to burn about 3,000, burning it at 12.5 tons per hour and replace about 2.5% of the coal that was going in. Well, anytime you start up something new, there's a few things that don't work. Murphy's Law comes right up and bites you on the ankle, and a few engineers found out that they weren't quite as enlightened as they thought they were, and we got them out of the way, got some of our farmers involved, and they redesigned it, and then it worked. We got up to 16 ton per hour, and one day it was verified by the operators sitting up in their little tower up there that we reduced the coal by 2%, and they could verify we were generating 13 megawatts of electricity purely off the switchgrass that was going into that plant. So that made us feel real good. I'm going to keep that email forever that I got from the test engineer that was taking the samples. So what I'd like to do is run through a brief presentation. We just gave this out at the Electric Power Research Institute in Washington here a couple weeks ago. I'd like to have been able to have the time to get a few more iron type pictures in here and relate it a little bit more to farmers. But one of the things we're trying to do is balance not only the energy production, but doing a lot of research to make sure we haven't overlooked anything as we try to build this into an industry for southern Iowa here on our HEL soils. So we are working with carbon sequestration, with wildlife research, soil erosion, soil quality, water quality, switchgrass diseases. Mike Duffy's working with the adoption, whether some of you farmers are going to take a look at this and say, hey, I think I could work with something like this. We're trying to encompass everything that it would take to build an industry from the grassroots up here in southern Iowa. So it's okay, I'll start through this, and if I can get the computer to work. Could you see this, or do we need to get a light off? Yeah, that's great. I'll get back out of the way so folks can see. Now if I can see which button to do. Basically, like I said, we're the Chariton Valley Biomass Project, and we were taking a real hard look at the cultural practices that had been done in the past, the word that was coming out. I've spent the last 20 years drilling switchgrass for people, no-till drilling it into worked up ground. It was a real hit or miss operation, and you really had to be dedicated to try to make it work, because you got to go slow, you got to have precise placement of the seed, you got to be patient. You can't run 19 mile an hour with that drill. You got to run about 4.5. When you pull out of this field, you had to wave, had about a third of those seeds waving goodbye to you as you pulled out. Oh, thank you. Well, what we've done is tried to take the best of Mother Nature and make it work with us. And We've come up with more and more of our operations revolving around frost seeding. This way we could use the existing agri-business equipment that's out there. This is a picture of late fall. We're going in and we're actually, it may offend some, the organic people, but what we're doing is wiping out the cool season grass with Roundup so that we can frost seed the switchgrass into it. This is a picture of a 10-year-old switchgrass field that had never been managed. It was just a CRP field sitting there with 1 year of the chemicals. We're going to try to hold this down, but we have to use chemicals to get in the gear up portion of this. This was atrazine, 2,4-D, and food grade lime, and HLF, that's fertilizer, that's a byproduct over here at Eddyville that we're using for our nitrogen source right now. This is a picture of a frost seeding right outside of Centerville this year. No other chemicals on it, we just frost seeded it. This was a crop field. This was what we got in growth the first year. This is what we normally ran into. Our project started really for earnest in 1997, 10 years after the first sign up for CRP. A lot of folks put in switchgrass, and NRCS said, hey, you've got a switchgrass field out there. Yeah, we did, but it sure wasn't a biomass field. That was full of weeds. We went in, mowed that. We got just about 0.8 of a ton per acre. That just really didn't catch it. This is a 3-year-old field that we've been managing, 2 years with the chemical and the fertilization. 3-year-old field, that yielded 4.85 this year. That's the difference, just in a few years of management, what we can do. This is another field that we're managing. We try to harvest our crop once a year. We harvest 10 days to 2 weeks after a killing frost. That's when the temperature gets down to 15, 18 degrees. Make sure that plant is into full dormancy. The P and the K goes back to the roots. It's a C4 grass, which means that it's going to be a very sustainable. It's what was here and built our soils to begin with. So if you manage it the way Mother Nature would, it's going to be there basically forever. We have real low P and K takeout rates when we wait at least 2 weeks after, after a killing frost. There's just some more pictures. John Deere and Vermeer have been two of our agribusiness partners. John Deere has loaned us equipment and personnel. A lot of it is prototype equipment, so we're not allowed to take as many pictures as we'd like, but they're getting some very valuable field test time and not having to take the iron. They're going from Ottumwa over to Rathbun Lake rather than Ottumwa to Australia. So we hope it's a win-win for all of our partners, but it really is for Vermeer and John Deere at this point. This is harvest down in the South Chariton River bottom. This is a 3-year-old field that's 125 acres on this side of the river, 1.25 miles long, right down in the floodplain on the Chariton, like I say, the South Chariton River. And this is the type of pictures we had to do with the baler because it was that way you can't really pick up any really great inside information on that baler. This is another view of the baler coming at you. We can harvest all winter if we don't have a lot of snow on the ground. This is just another picture, and I was trying to highlight, we leave a 100-foot buffer that we have not sprayed or anything right next to the South Chariton going along, and we don't harvest that at any time. And that's what we try to do on a lot of our CRP fields, is to leave a big buffer, especially if there's a water course or waterway, or if we got a stand of brush. That way we've got some good edge for the wildlife. Basically, we have gone, because of trucking and liability and logistics, we're going to a 3x4x8 big square bale package. That way they can be loaded up in the field. We can go pretty close to maximum weight this way. Each one of those bales is averaging about 1,100 pounds. And that's a 4440 John Deere with just an old loader on it, and he was able to load them. He's able to load that two at a time with that, so it goes fairly fast. We have built a big building right next to the Ottumwa Generating Station with one of our cooperators, Gary Kelderman of Kelderman Manufacturing up in Oskaloosa. And if you know Gary, you know he's a real machine type guy. He's got a little Positrack there with the safety stuff going up. He can unload that semi in 8 minutes. I mean, it's safe. We couldn't believe it, but we can pull a semi in there and he's got it unloaded in no time. We built 7 buildings in cost share with cooperators out amongst in the higher density areas where we've got lots of fields. Square bales soak up rain and moisture like a sponge, so we do have to put some housing up because of the non-predictability of when we're going to have a test burn. It may be 18 months at a time here while we're getting this going. We had to have a good safe place to go with them, and a tarp out in the edge of the field doesn't catch it. We've wind, this and that. We've had a lot of challenges. We tried that first and it was a dismal failure. So we've gone to the buildings and we cost shared with some farmers that were interested, and that's one of them there. This is another picture of Gary Kelderman's up at the plant, and it's big enough. His is 125 by 240 with 30-foot sidewalls. He's got a cat high lift it's a boom that comes out. He can stack them 13 high in there. So it's very, very impressive when you see that. That building will hold 9,000 big square bales right there. So. Then, like I say, we're working through the economic analysis. Unfortunately, we're the only market. Our biomass project is the only market for switchgrass, so it's a little hard to come up with the cost. Our production costs, considering everything, if you've ever been through an Iowa State budget, you know they can think up more charges than the man in the moon, but I know running by theirs, I sure couldn't raise cattle, but anyway, and I'm not picking on the poor folks, they're just trying to give you a good solid picture, but we're running production costs right now from $49 to $66, and a couple of the folks, we're buying it at the farm gate, at the edge of the field, loaded on our truck for $49, and then it takes another 10, 12 to get it in to the plant. So costs are looking right now at $49 to $66. We're doing a series of economic analysis on these costs. I'm going to get them a little bit more realistic. And also the mix, we were looking at the too high $11 a pound switchgrass costs that went into those budgets originally too. So right today, you're looking at $4 to $5 for your switchgrass. So that makes a lot of difference too. We're also looking for some of the ways that we can put a safety net under for say a man has 25, 40 acres that he'd like to try. It's not in CRP. How can we get him a little bit of economic return during the normal seeding period? It normally takes 1 to 2 years to get a field up to snuff. We had one field that we frost seeded this year. We harvested 1.8 tons off the first year. We went 20 miles away over on the other side of our area. It was so dry over there, no rain. We can't even find any switchgrass in that field. So you get a whole spectrum. There aren't any stock answers, but normally we're looking at 2 years before you can harvest switchgrass. So we're looking at what we can do to generate some economic activity during the time that's being established. We're looking at some hay production, grazing, or companion cropping. And we're also, for down the road, we're looking at a series of legumes that we can be putting into that won't lower the burn quality, but will go ahead and fix the nitrogen for that plant so we don't have that expense. And by virtue of having a legume in there, that'll keep us from using any atrazine and 2,4-D. So that's going to be a double bonus if we can get this to work and to get the burn quality that won't hurt the plant down there at Ottumwa. But with that right there, I just no-tilled some sweet clover into one of my old fields. We're also looking at corn, no-tilling corn, frost seeding the switchgrass. This was another stand on my farm, and you can see the switchgrass growing up through that. We have found you need like 38-inch rows and 17,000 population. If you get 30-inch rows with 34,000 plants per acre, you'll start out like that, but when that corn gets it shaded out, it's gone. It gets spindly, and it just deprived of light, and it just won't make it. So. We're also doing a lot of studies to see how much good we were getting out of grazing. This was in Iowa State down on my farm. These little lanes were 24 feet long and 120 feet wide. If that isn't a misery trying to build electric fences, 30 of them. I mean, 15 minutes and they got that sucker eaten. But anyway, we did get some good information off grazing it once during different stages of V2, V3, and then when in the elongation right before it started its seed head, try to see how much pounds of beef we could get them off of there, and then see how much it would grow back for biomass. This is a field, another field of mine. I've got Timothy interseeded in with the switchgrass, trying to take advantage of the different growth curves. I had taken a hay crop off of it. It was real dry over in our area last spring, so I went in and flash grazed with a set of heifers. That was the second economic bit of activity off that. And that's the same field from where the heifers were sitting, looking back, and I got almost a ton of biomass off of that later on. So that was the switchgrass came up, and it looks like the Timothy's going to take right off again next spring. Timothy is worth right now anywhere from $65 to $100 a ton, so if I can get a ton of that off ahead of time and still get that, I feel like that's going to help me in my non-CRP acres with this. And we're doing, like I say, the wildlife studies, water quality, carbon sequestration. Most of this is with Iowa State University. This is just some strips we were cutting like 20 meters wide or 30 meters wide, and then cutting 40 or 50, leaving another 20 or 38 meter wide strip up through the field, just to look at which species were benefiting, which ones were being impacted adversely. And it's real funny how some are really helped by doing this, and others do a lot better if you take the whole field and just leave one on the edge, something like that. So every species, there isn't a cookbook answer for this on the wildlife, and we're looking at non-game birds as well as game birds. And we're trying to work with all of our cooperators, putting in food plots as a supplement to all of our fields. This is some water quality work. We were out there on the sunny day. We were raining 2.5 inches an hour, and we were on freshly frost-seeded ground that was bean stubble, fully tilled, some no-till corn, and this was another one on my farm. This was 13-year-old switchgrass that we were taking a look to see how the chemicals would move off of it, and also the soil erosion components. I know this isn't the best picture, but the water coming off that switchgrass was just perfectly clear. I mean, it was really a happy feeling to be looking at that as opposed to a soybean field that here was the topsoil coming off at 10 to 15 ton per acre rate. This is just another picture of that buffer strip. You can see the difference. We've got a few more broadleaf weeds in there, but like I say, we try, anytime we've got a waterway, we stay out at least 100 yards or 100 feet away from that, just to keep the atrazine and the 2,4-D where they belong. And here's a couple of young ladies that are doing carbon sequestration work with Dr. Lee Burris up at Iowa State, and they're sampling all these fields and calculating how much carbon is being sequestered. And like I say, we're doing other studies like any diseases that might show up in a monoculture. And then we're also looking at cool season grasses. Number 1 on the list is reed canary, and then number 2 on the list are your other mixes that are out on your cool season CRP fields, your orchard, brome, and fescue. And this is some test work on fertility strips in reed canary. This is Palatine, so we could use this for hay if we had to. And this is just a typical CRP cool season field. This one was orchard grass and brome, but trying to find where we could maximize production and least bit of environmental damage when it comes to wildlife or regulations from CRP also, because you're looking at getting away from the nesting date on that. And then we always have to have our appreciation slide. And Iowa State, Leopold, there's a lot of folks who didn't show up on here, Farm Bureau. We've got a whole list. I've got a handout back in the back that kind of is a fact sheet put out by Department of Energy. And one other handout, you'll see part of southeast Iowa with some rings running around. One of the things we're hoping to get done is to get a pilot project down here in southeast Iowa, basically a 70-mile radius around Ottumwa Generating Station, where we would be able to sell either cool or warm season grasses off CRP and still retain the CRP payment to get this industry another kickstart. We don't know if it's going to work. It's in Washington. We just got to see what the folks at FSA have to say. So with that, thank you so much for your attention. And, I may need the computer expert, Mr. Woolsey, to... How do I turn this sucker off? Shit, that was easy. Here, no, she's got to do it again now.
Monica's got it. Yeah, oh, you got a PowerPoint?
There you go. Sorry it took so long.
You had more important stuff to say.
Jeez, not even close. Not even close.
Besides, I'd rather not talk about switchgrass at all.
There you go.
You've been using
Department positions on electric utility restructuring issues and serving as staff to the Governor's Energy Policy Task Force. Monica has been instrumental in the instigation and delivery of the BEM agenda and has assisted several states establish similar programs, and she is currently working to help set up community-based energy efficiency programs in Eastern Europe. Monica?
Hey. I wish I could tell you that my presentation is going to be as pretty as John's was, but it's not. We're talking about policy. It said my name is Monica Stone. My area of expertise within the Bureau is energy efficiency, so I'm more than happy to talk about both. Today I'm here to talk about renewables, but if you have questions about efficiency after we're all done here, I'd be happy to talk about those as well. The Bureau is responsible for the state's energy policy and for developing and delivering energy programs throughout the state. We do a lot of work in energy efficiency and renewable energy in terms of demonstration and commercialization of all kinds of technologies and programs out there. The state's energy policy goals are to increase energy efficiency in the state by 20% and to increase generation from renewable energy in the state to 10%. Right now we're at about 2% with the wind farms in the northern part of the state and various other small hydro and biomass systems throughout the state. We'd like to see that go up to 10%. We know it could probably go higher, but we think 10% is a great place to start. What we do in terms of state energy issues and state policy issues is really anything that saves energy or increases the use of renewable resources. We have programs for schools, helping them do energy efficiency, install wind turbines, and examine other types of projects out there. We also have projects with specific renewable applications, and I'll talk more about those as we move along. We have a wide array of educational and financial programs. One of the biggest barriers to doing renewable energy technologies as well as energy efficiency is having the upfront capital. And one of the things we do is partner with banks around the state and around the region to make sure that we can get financing for these types of projects. In addition to that, boy, that's awfully bureaucratic speak for, we just help people do stuff and make sure that energy efficiency and renewable energy get in the ground. Among Iowa's renewable resources, we know that there's no secret out there that we have a vast array of energy resources. Most of them, probably with the exception of high sulfur coal, rest in the area of renewables, and we think we ought to be using more of those. Our long-term goal is to move energy, renewable energy, from an area of demonstration projects into commercialization. So it's common practice for folks to be using renewable energy. Some of the different technologies that we have, we'll start off with wind. We all know that we have a lot of wind here in Iowa, and we know a lot of it centered around the state capitol this time of year, but luckily it mostly runs up in the northern part of the state after they send everybody home. And those projects have been real successful. We're seeing some additional wind farms that are being looked at up there. Every school district in Iowa, let me tell you, wants a wind turbine. I wish I could get them all one, but I can't. And we know that Iowa's wind resource is good. We could probably generate a little more than 4 times the energy we use in the state from our wind resources alone. Back in 1983, we passed the Alternative Energy Production Law, and what that law did was require investor-owned utilities to purchase 105 megawatts of power annually from renewable energy resources. In 1999, that finally happened. It took a while, but that's why we saw the wind farms go in, and that's why people started talking about those things. We now have more than 300 wind turbines in the state and a combined capacity of 240 megawatts. I feel like a lot of this all got started up in Spirit Lake with their school district. Back when I started working with the Energy Bureau 11 years ago, a real innovative school superintendent up there said, hey, we think we should put up a wind turbine. And I won't wrestle through all of the bureaucratic rigmarole we went through to get it, but finally we got that wind turbine up and people started talking. It was a big one. It wasn't on a farm. It was with the school. It was, you know, something that was really sexy and interesting, and all of a sudden wind really got started. And so that school superintendent up there, even though he wasn't the first, was one of the ones who really got things rolling. Ethanol, again, no secret here in Iowa that ethanol is a good thing for our economy and a good thing related to energy. More than 170 bushels of Iowa corn is processed into ethanol annually, and we have the capability of producing 441 million gallons each year. In Iowa, there are about 15 new ethanol plants under consideration right now, and we think they'd have a combined capacity of 200 million gallons a year. So those folks in California who don't think they could get ethanol from us, we think they probably could. Iowa state government, just to pat ourselves on the back, was one of the first early adopters of E85 technology, and we have one of the largest E85 fleets in the nation. For a long time we did have the largest, and we've actually been able to trade credits for E85 with other states, which has been a good economic development too, although I'd really rather see them have more E85 cars. So we'll work on that. We also have 6 retail locations to buy E85, which is a gasoline blend of 85% ethanol and the rest traditional gasoline. And those are in Sergeant Bluff, Ames, Council Bluffs, West Des Moines, Osage, and West Burlington. So if you've been lucky enough to buy one of the new Ford pickups or cars that runs on E85, Chrysler minivan.
That's the official town car of Fairfield.
Great, wonderful. Go up to Iowa City and fill up with E85. Hopefully someday we'll get you one down here. You won't have to go to Burlington or up to Iowa City. The Governor's Ethanol Coalition certainly promotes ethanol's benefits in the state and with federal clean environmental initiatives. Last year, Governor Vilsack served as chair of the Governor's Ethanol Coalition. That helped move the issues of ethanol along in the state and hopefully nationally. I know he and Gray Davis have had numerous conversations about the merits of ethanol, and we've been heavily involved in those. Some interesting information, back in December we hit a high of ethanol usage in the state of 55.4%, that 0.4 is real important, usage of all gasoline sales in Iowa. We'd certainly like to see it go higher. It had hovered around 40% for a very long time. I think this is really good news. And as we look at gasoline prices increasing over the summer, I think we'll see more and more people looking at ethanol, the E10 blend, as a great alternative. We get a lot of questions in our office about ethanol and can you use it in your car if it's so old, or if it, if it's this or that. And everybody has their own experiences. What I understand is that really you can use ethanol in just about any car, and the ethanol really acts much as the detergents act that have been put in gasoline since the early 80s. And so if your car is older than that, maybe look at your engine to make sure you could use ethanol, but anything after the early 80s, ethanol ought to work even better than the traditional gasoline blends in your vehicle. My next couple of slides are on the switchgrass programs. And let me tell you, I couldn't do any better than John did in talking about them. I'd be happy to talk about DNR's role in them, but I'm just going to fly on through those because John did such a great job, and move on to methane recovery. I will tell you that my brother is the air quality guy who's doing the air testing and the air permitting for that project. So if you want to know when that's going to happen, I've been needling him to get that moved along. Methane recovery, I think, is a really interesting thing that's happening in Iowa. There are currently a number of research projects in Iowa for methane recovery, which is really the process of trapping methane gas from manure and other organic materials. It reduces the odor, which I think is of great importance, but it also captures energy that can be used for electricity on site to run the operations, which is also very important. There are a number of methane recovery projects here in Iowa. Iowa State University has completed a project methodology for performing an assessment of livestock industry waste in Iowa. So it's really a study to determine what resources are available and how we can best use them. And they've had one workshop on that, and they'll continue to have more workshops educating farmers about methane recovery. There are a couple of projects that will be installed in the near future. One is at Northeast Iowa Community College, where they're going to be working with the Northeast Iowa Community-Based Dairy Foundation, and they operate a 140 cow dairy operation as a part of an applied research program. What we'll be doing there is installing a digester to operate a boiler for heat and hot water at the dairy operation, and that should be coming online in the next few months. Top Deck Dairy, which is also up in the northern part of the state, up around Kalmar, is an 800 cow confinement facility, and we've just signed a contract with Top Deck Dairy to do methane recovery there as well. And we may offset demand for energy at the facility. There's also the possibility that we'll be selling that energy to Alliant Utilities, which would be an interesting twist on things, and we'd like to see that happen. Two projects that are in the ground and happening right now: the Crawford Farm project up in Nevada, Iowa. The project partners have installed an anaerobic sequencing batch reactor and biogas boiler for the Crawford's 2,800 head swine finishing operation, and they're able to offset a great amount of electricity at their facility. And then Swine USA constructed a 4,800 head farrow to wean operation near Creston, Iowa, and they've installed a complete mixed digester and 100 kilowatt engine generator, and they produce about 60 kilowatts of electricity for their own usage. They're at their facility. The Swine USA project has the added benefit of they're at the end of their transmission lines, and they often came home at night and found their things blinking 12 on their VCRs and everything else, which is not the worst thing, but it's a minor annoyance. And with this, they've had added reliability at their home as well, because they've been able to generate their own electricity for their own use. So it's a benefit, and if you don't know how to set your own VCR, that's a really great thing. Moving on to solar, we're in the first year of a really large grant to study photovoltaic use in the Midwest. Right now we know that photovoltaics and solar are a fairly expensive option for use in the Midwest, but we'd like to know what the resource is, what the costs are, and how we might be better able to promote some specific uses that will be more cost effective of solar. So in the first year, we're going to be doing a survey and a study of builders and architects looking for barriers to the increased use of photovoltaics. And in the second year, we're going to look at training people on how to increase the use of photovoltaics in the state and hopefully increase market share for that. That'll be a part of the Million Solar Roofs program that I'm sure many of you have heard of, where former President Clinton looked at the possibility of installing a million solar roofs, actually putting panels on people's roofs around the nation, and we'll be moving forward with that here in Iowa. Now we can talk about some of the good stuff. The current Iowa energy legislation, there's an alternate energy revolving loan program that's administered through the Iowa Energy Center. And for those folks who aren't familiar with the Energy Center and the Energy Bureau is part of the Department of Natural Resources. The Energy Center is part of Iowa State University. They do a lot of research and demonstration into renewable energy and energy efficiency technologies. So they're sort of the R&D arm, and we're the policy arm. So that's how we differ. They do run the Alternative Energy Revolving Loan Fund, which allows commercial, residential, and industrial consumers to get a zero-interest loan for up to $250,000 of a renewable energy project, and then the remaining 50% would come from local bankers who would be worked with. This has been a great project for folks who wanted to install small wind turbines all the way up to some larger schools that have done some really great projects. And I know that right now it's a little bit undersubscribed, so if you're looking at putting in a system, this would be one way to get some money toward that at zero interest, which is really valuable. Another piece of legislation is the methane gas conversion property tax exemption. And all that's bureaucratic speak for if you have a methane gas conversion system on your property, you don't have to pay state property taxes on that. We also have an ethanol-based fuel sales tax exemption. This is what has helped ethanol cost about 2 cents less a gallon at the pump in many locations around the state. That expires in 2007, so that's something that to kind of keep in mind if that's an important part of the things that you're interested in, to remember 2007 is an important date. We also have a wind energy equipment sales tax exemption, kind of the same thing as the methane conversion. If you have a wind generator, you're exempt from the state sales tax on the purchase of all wind energy equipment. Again, not a huge help, but a little better than nothing. Federal incentives include an investment tax credit for solar energy property. Anyone who invests in or purchases qualified solar energy property can take advantage of this tax credit, and it can be up to 10% of your total investment cost. So again, that's just another way to make solar energy more cost-effective around the nation. Just for your information, I do have copies of my presentation back on the table back there, so if you're interested in writing down these different tax credits or anything else, they're all back there, so you can just pick up a copy. Another federal incentive is the wind production tax credit, and that credit is available to new renewable energy facilities and put into service prior to December 31st, 2001. So that one's up for renewal, and that'll be an important issue if we want to continue that production tax credit to be talking to legislators about. That's really the end of what I've planned on talking about. We'll have questions and answers later, and as I said, I'd be happy to talk about energy efficiency, renewable energy policies, or anything that I can talk about related to what's going on at the legislature this year. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Monica. Our next speaker is David Osterberg. David is an associate clinical professor in the Department of Occupational and Environmental Health at the University of Iowa, where he teaches classes in environmental health policy. David consults regularly on energy and natural resource issues. He has appeared as an expert witness for consumer groups, environmental groups, and small businesses in contested cases before state public utility commissions in 8 states and before the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission. During 12 years in the Iowa General Assembly, David served as chairman of the House Committee on Energy and Environmental Protection and chairman of the House Committee on Agriculture. He was the Democratic Party candidate for U.S. Senator in '98. During '99 and 2000, he has consulted for the Iowa Department of Natural Resources on global climate change and renewable energy. And a brief personal note, as a teenager growing up in the '70s in Mount Vernon, where David was then teaching at Cornell College, one spring day I ditched class to hitch a ride to Cedar Rapids for my first protest rally back during the days of 3 Mile Island. I was standing in the crowd with my hair down to here and my homemade "No Nukes is Good Nukes" t-shirt and listened to David speak, and for the first time I really thought about energy as an environmental issue. Well, 22 years later, I no longer have the hair down to here, but I still learn something about energy and the environment every time I hear David speak. David?
Thank you. As you see, neither Rich nor I have hair down to our waist anymore. No. I hope you can hear me, because I move around a little bit, especially with a group like this. You need to wake up. You need to move. Okay, what I get to talk about something different from what the other people are doing. Totally different. Because while John has talked about how you look at an energy crop on your land, Monica's talked about wind power, ethanol, a number of things, and Ed is also going to talk about Iowa. I'm going to talk about bigger stuff. I'm going to talk about global climate change and what is happening, what we should know about it, whether we can feel fairly secure that maybe something is going on. Because if global warming is happening, there is going to be a continuous market for the kind of things these people are talking about. It's not going to be Jerusalem artichokes, where you start out and all of a sudden, whoa, there is no market. I think that what we know now about global climate change ought to make us confident that bad things are going to happen if we do not begin to respond and do something about producing energy in a way that doesn't produce as much carbon dioxide as it has been in the way we've been doing it. First thing is I have on that overhead is a kind of a famous quotation. It comes out of a group called the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. This group was set up in 1988, part of the UN, part of the World Meteorological Organization. It's a big think tank of a bunch of smart people. And they're the ones that know most about what's happening on the Earth when it comes to putting more greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. 1995, they came out with this statement that the balance of evidence suggests a discernible human influence on global climate. That you could begin to see that the fact that for 200 years we've been burning up coal and gas and petroleum and putting that stuff up into the atmosphere, 200 years of that has a discernible effect on the atmosphere, very discernible, we can see that pretty easily, but it now is moving to have an effect on climate. Now, when they came out with that, there was a lot of controversy, especially coal companies didn't want to believe this very much. A lot of other people whose kind of interest it was not to believe it didn't believe it. But what I'm going to show you is we have been moving down the scientific road that says fewer and fewer people deny there is global climate change going on. That happened in 1995. In 1999, just about 2 years ago, a group called the American Geophysical Union. Now, the American Geophysical Union is most of the scientists who study this kind of stuff in the United States. It is scientists who are atmospheric scientists, geologists, 40-some thousand scientists belong to this organization. And they felt they had to say something about global climate change, and they did. They said, the AGU believes that the present level of scientific uncertainty does not justify inaction in the mitigation of human-induced climate change. That's not exactly a strong statement. But these are scientists, and scientists are used to not saying anything. You know? They just don't want to be beyond where they ought to be. And they're very conservative, these folks. And so this, people like me would look at this and say, yeah, but they said mitigation of human-induced climate change. They're saying there is human-induced climate change. And they did. Then we had something that came out just about a year ago, and it was January of last year. It came out from a group, also another big scientific group, the National Academy of Sciences. The National Academy of Sciences are the smartest scientists we have in the United States. You got to be an incredible person to be on that board. Hardly anybody from the University of Iowa has ever been on that. It is big time. Wait a minute, I didn't mean to say that. There are plenty of us who are, well, yeah, okay, I'm not going to go any further than that. Anyway, it's real smart folk. And they have something called the National Research Council. And the National Research Council was looking at something interesting, because when it comes to measuring how much the Earth has warmed, you have a problem here. The problem is that, first of all, you don't measure the Earth every place. Like the South Atlantic, you have one spot where you're measuring temperature. That's not very many. Same thing with the Pacific. You have lots of places in England, lots of places in Sweden, and in Holland they've been measuring stuff for 300 years. We've been doing it for 100. So you can't look at the Earth and say, do we really know what the temperature has been going up, because we don't have real accurate measurements. We have to kind of interpolate some. Also, a lot of places that were looked at were at airports. For instance, the Phoenix Airport was one of the places where you've been measuring temperature over the last 50 years or so. And what's happened at the Phoenix Airport is, geez, you got so much more concrete, so much more tarmac, that can you really say that's an accurate long-term measurement? And no, you can't, because it's way warmer than it used to be there. However, you can make changes, and scientists have done that. But here you had one group of measurements that said the Earth has warmed about a degree in the last 100 years. And then you had, all of a sudden, measurements coming from satellites. And they seemed not to say the same thing. Because of that controversy, the National Academy of Sciences got together and said, go out and study this. They studied it for about 18 months, and this is what they concluded. Despite strong differences in temperature data, strong evidence exists to show that the warming of the Earth's surface is undoubtedly real, and that surface temperatures in the past 2 decades have risen at a rate substantially greater than average for the past 100 years, says a new report by the National Research Council of the National Academies. By the way, the underlines are stuff I put in to quote so. Notice that undoubtedly real is in quotations. They wanted people to notice. They were saying, shut up and stop arguing about whether the Earth is warming. It's warming! Now, we still have to talk about why it's warming, but there is no question the Earth is warming. None. So, that was an important piece. And the last one, the last kind of thing I'm going to put up here, is what this same group, this IPCC, they came out with their first report in 1990, their second report in 1995, and they're now releasing their last report. And what it says is that it is likely that greenhouse gases have contributed substantially to the observed warming over the last 50 years. And when this was leaked last fall to the New York Times, the notice was that instead of being kind of timid the way the AGU was, scientists are now saying, we have warming, let's talk about what we do about it. So as far as some controversy going on over whether or not the Earth is warming, there is none. The Earth is warming. Now, why that might be happening, there is still some controversy about, but not so much. First of all, when it comes to something called the greenhouse effect, what the greenhouse effect is, it's real. It means that we're a certain amount of distance from the sun. And if you just looked at how warm we ought to be at that distance from the sun, you would find it ought to be 0 degrees right now on Earth, on average. Too cold for life. It's not that, and the reason it's not, and the reason it's warmer, is because certain gases in the atmosphere trap that sun's energy and hold it here. Nitrogen doesn't do it. Oxygen doesn't do it. Argon doesn't do it. Those are the three biggest gases in the atmosphere. In fact, those three gases are 99% of what's in the atmosphere. There are a small number of greenhouse gases, mainly carbon dioxide and water vapor, that hold that stuff in and make the Earth's climate on average 59 degrees Fahrenheit, not zero. And if you think about this, Venus is another planet out there, often called the twin planet to the Earth, because it's getting close to the same size, pretty close to the same distance from the Sun. On Venus right now, it's a little closer, therefore it ought to be a little warmer than the Earth. Temperature, if I were doing the weather report on Venus, I would say Venus today is hot, 800 degrees Fahrenheit. Why? Not because of its distance from the Sun, but the amount of atmosphere the greenhouse has. The reason that Mars is so cold is because it doesn't have much of an atmosphere. This is the Goldilocks effect. Goldilocks wandering around the atmosphere, around the solar system, would find one planet too hot, one planet too cold, and the other one, Earth. Just exactly what you'd expect us to say, just right, because we developed on this planet. Greenhouse effect is real. You treat it like gravity. You don't make you don't question greenhouse effect. It is real. Now, the question is whether there is an enhanced greenhouse effect. The fact that we have been burning more carbon dioxide, more fuel, and putting carbon dioxide, a greenhouse gas, into the atmosphere, is that having an increasing effect on the world's temperature? Now, the only interesting slide I have here, the one that isn't either graph or words, is this one. Who is this guy? Anybody know? Who does it look like? Yeah, everybody says Teddy Roosevelt. It does. Also looks like, you know, Chester A. Arthur and a whole bunch of other presidents we don't remember much. But this guy is a man named Svante Arrhenius, a Swedish chemist, got the Nobel Prize, pretty smart guy. Arrhenius, and the reason I put him up, I mean, he looks like every one of my Swedish uncles, exactly, because they came to this country in the 1880s and 1890s, and they had their picture taken. Teddy Roosevelt was president in 1901. The reason he looks this way is because that was when he was writing on his enhanced greenhouse effect theory. This is a 100-year-old theory. And remember, science does not prove stuff to be right, it proves stuff to be wrong. And in 100 years, you have not disproved this theory. That ought to give you some confidence that the greenhouse effect, the enhanced greenhouse effect, is real. And when you look at what's been going on to carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, there is no question it's gone up. These 5 graphs come out of that IPCC, that new report that's just being released, and you can't see it, I know that, but what you do, you measure carbon dioxide concentration on this axis and time on this axis, okay? So time comes forward, carbon dioxide is going up and down. What you see is that if you go back really a long ways, back to, boy, this is, if you go way back in Earth's history, you find there was a lot of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Talking about 5,000 or 6,000 parts per million. It goes down, it goes up a little bit, and here is the present time. This is 600 million years ago. I mean, this is so long ago that right here, that's the time of the dinosaurs. The time of the dinosaurs, there was a lot more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere than there is now, about as much as there will be at the end of this next century. That we are heading for the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere that were last there during dinosaur times. Now, if you want to look at another one of these graphs, this one only goes back a mere 400,000 years. I mean, this is all geology stuff. The time is so long. But what you find there is the ice ages. And every time we had an ice age, when you had these big glaciers covering huge amounts of North America, huge amounts of Iowa. In fact, the Des Moines Lobe, that area north of Des Moines, is where the last glacier came, and Monica had said something about the state legislature where I used to serve, not only is there a lot of wind coming out of that place now, that for some reason the glacier kind of anticipated what it would expect. It got to Des Moines and stopped cold, and just because it got to where the state capitol sits right now, and didn't move beyond that. But these glaciers were half a mile thick. They were big things. Now, when you had those glaciers running amok, you had very low amounts of carbon dioxide. Then the interglacial would happen and the amount of carbon dioxide would go up substantially. And so you have this kind of a pattern. And there is no doubt about the amount of carbon dioxide that there was in the atmosphere at different times, because you can actually measure the air that people breathed 1,000 years ago or 400,000 years ago by going down into glaciers, and you pull up along with that ice air bubbles, and in those air bubbles you can measure the amount of carbon dioxide. There is no question at all about what the carbon dioxide content of the air has been over the last 500,000 years or so. And what you see here is that when it was warm, lots of carbon dioxide. When it was cold, little carbon dioxide. Okay? The last of these graphs to look at, and that is what has happened over the last 10,000 years, where you see the amount of carbon dioxide, again, no problem measurement here, has been between about 260 and 280 parts per million. That's where it's been for 10,000 years. That's kind of where it's been for the last 500,000 years until now. The amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has gone from that 180 parts per million to 300 parts per million. It is now up to 370 parts per million. It has never been that high in the last 500,000 years. It may not have been that high for the last 15 million years. We have put more carbon dioxide into this atmosphere than it has seen in a very long time. And if there is an association between warm times and lots of carbon dioxide, you'd expect, if this theory is right, to see an increase in the Earth's temperature, and that you have seen. Those are the hottest years in the last 1,000. They're all in the 90s. 1998, 1997, 1995, 1990, 1999, 2000, 1991, and 1994. Those are the hottest years we have seen in the last 1,000. Let me show you this. You see, and when you say the hottest years in the last 1,000, it's not saying, let's go back and guess what it was in 1474 and then see if it was hotter now. You did that. You go back and you do tree rings and you do all kinds of experiments in order to find this, and then you figure out what you think the temperature was. But then, because you're scientists and you want to make sure you know what that temperature was, you then do a couple of standard deviations around that point to see how hot it could have been. We are outside of this range around those point estimates, and we are way up there, way beyond where it could have been for the last 1,000 years. So that's how sure you are that it is hotter now than it has been in the last 1,000 years, and seemingly getting hotter. This IPCC report that is just now coming out, and it's dribbling out. They have 3 different working groups, and each of them comes out with something. They say that by the end of the next century, the amount of warming that we can expect is going to be variable. It depends on how much we do to stop putting carbon dioxide in, all kinds of things. But basically, if we don't do much, it's going to be 10.5 degrees hotter on Earth, on average, 100 years from now. I mean, think about where it is that it's on average 10 degrees hotter now than it is in Iowa, for instance. It would be like taking the state of Iowa and sending it off to Oklahoma or Texas. That's if you don't have much rain. If you have a lot of rain, it's putting it out in South Carolina. That's kind of the effect of it. It doesn't end Earth life or anything like that, but it sure does change things. Remember, when those big glaciers were around, it was 9 degrees colder than it is now. 10.5 degrees is an amazing amount of warming, and people don't expect it to necessarily get that hot. That's how hot it could get. Probably it's going to be closer to 6 degrees Fahrenheit warmer on Earth, on average. When you look at what's happened over the last 100 years, and this comes from NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. It's off their website. They have land and oceans, oceans and land. So let me get this land and oceans. What we see over the last, this starts in 1880, is temperature went down a little bit, it went up a little bit, it went up quite a bit. There's still a lot of variability in here. Carbon dioxide doesn't explain everything. The sun can be getting a little hotter and a little colder. Volcanoes really do a lot of things to mitigate how much temperature is increasing. When Mount Pinatubo went up, we had 2 colder years after that. There's lots of stuff here that is not just greenhouse gases. But greenhouse gases, most people think now, is very powerful as an effect on warming the Earth. And we are moving into a warming period. And if we are, and we don't turn off the reason why it's getting so warm, we're going to have substantial amounts of warming. Substantial amounts of warming. Now, that's kind of the first part. The second part I want to run through even faster than this is there has been a lot of resistance in the United States, especially to this notion that the Earth is getting warmer and we ought to be doing something about it. There was just a big UN conference that happened in Holland, happened in The Hague last November, and it broke up. It broke up because the United States was unwilling to do anything, basically. Europeans have looked at this and said, we must begin to do something about this. Americans have looked at this and said, our oil companies don't like us doing stuff about this, and we're going to deny there's anything going on. But as science is moving towards accepting this theory of global warming, you also find interesting things going on in the business community. And there is a business group called the Global Climate Coalition, and they were set up to oppose any action on global warming. When the Kyoto Treaty was signed in Japan in 1997, amongst a whole bunch of countries saying we need to really deal with global warming and start reducing our CO2, these guys did all they could to get us not even sign that. That organization has been falling apart recently. And what I have for you, they call themselves a voice for business in the global warming debate. Things are changing. This is from January 7, 2000, about a year ago. An AP story that talked about Daimler Chrysler, which withdrew Thursday, is the latest example of a company quitting the coalition to demonstrate sensitivity to environmental issues. The Ford Motor Company quit last month, that last month being December of 1999. Company officials said the group meaning the Climate Change Coalition, had become an impediment to pursuing environmental initiatives in a credible way. People just didn't believe Ford cared anything as long as they belonged to an organization that completely denied there was any kind of global warming going on. Second, a little more recent article. This one comes from a Reuters news service, November 8, 2000, says, this tells you first of all who the Global Climate Coalition is. The GCC has previously spent millions of dollars on campaigns arguing that research into global warming is still too limited to draw any firm conclusions. In recent months, image-conscious energy and automobile companies have I think that's supposed to be dropping out of the group, including oil giants BP, Texaco, Royal Dutch Shell, Ford Motor Company. The movement is away from denial. And it's away from denial even by the energy and transportation companies you'd expect to want to deny as long as they can. This is the interesting thing that the Global Climate Coalition did. Shortly after the resignations of all these companies, they said they don't want to have companies in their organization anymore, so you can't leave, because you can't be in. So all they have now is the American Petroleum Institute and Edison Electric Institute, those kind of people. They're in real big trouble. And you see, there wasn't ever the API, the American Petroleum Institute, it's dribble. Go to their website, it's still the same dribble. They haven't given up. But most people who actually have to sell products have given up. And a bunch of them are now belong to something called the Pew Leadership Council. Pew Leadership Council is not made up, it's made up of companies who believe global warming is going on and they ought to be doing something about it. Unless you think it's going to be, sort of the local Sunrise Dairy and Ben & Jerry's and those kind of companies who are solid companies and also more environmental conscious, you have all kinds of people like Intel, American Electric Power, like Alcoa, Sunoco, Shell. I mean, these are the people belonging to this, all agree that we need to go at least as far as the Kyoto Treaty and beyond, that we need to be doing something. And these are business folks, $550 billion worth of assets in that group. And what they are saying is we need some better policy. And in that better policy, we now get back to what John was talking about, what Monica was talking about, that there is a market here. Embrace that market because it's going to be happening. The insurance industry was the first of those that was real concerned about global warming. And so you go to these UN conferences and you'd have the country of Kuwait and the country of Saudi Arabia saying, there's nothing going on here, along with Exxon Mobil, those kind of people. Business companies on the other side would generally be insurance companies. And not that they were, nicer guys or just people who were that much more aware. Their pocketbook was being hit a little bit. For instance, when I did a talk to the Insurance Institute in the state, I looked at a magazine that most of you probably don't read, Claims Magazine. Any readers of Claims Magazine here? Well, I wasn't either, and found a great article that said this. It went on to talk about the kind of stuff I've been talking to you now, about what we know about global warming, the fact that it's becoming much, much more real and more people are accepting that. Went on to say, well, if you don't even believe that stuff, note this. But if insurers aren't convinced by science that global warming should be a concern, they are stirred up by recent years' catastrophic loss numbers. The vast majority of property claims come from catastrophes caused by natural disasters. In the 5 years ending in 1996, catastrophe losses paid by insurers were $61.4 billion. And this is the important one. Double the total cost of all cat payments for the previous 25 years. When your house gets blown down by more severe weather, these guys are the ones that have to pay. When hurricanes become stronger because there's a warmer water to build up around, these guys have to pay off. They have always been much more interested in doing something about global climate change than most other industries have. But it's not just them. I want to talk, this is where I'm going to finish. It's not just them. As you saw, they talked about BP and Shell and Sunoco, Ford, Daimler Chrysler, all leaving that global climate coalition. Not only did they do that, they also moved into this Pew Center group, and also some of the chief executive officers of some of these companies have been out talking about global warming and the fact that we really need to do something about it. This is a statement from quite a while ago made at Stanford University and made by John Brown, who is British Petroleum's chief executive officer, British Petroleum Group chief executive officer. This is the biggest guy in British Petroleum, the third biggest oil company in the world. And this is what Brown said. There's a lot of noise in the data. fact that, you know, you can't correlate something. Satellites are saying different things from land station. There's a lot of noise in the data. It's hard to isolate cause and effect. But there is now an effective consensus among the world's leading scientists and serious and well-informed people outside the scientific community that there is a discernible human influence on climate and a link between the concentration of carbon dioxide and the increase in temperature. John Brown believes it. And what John Brown's company has gone on to do is buy the biggest solar company there was. And has promised that by 2005 it's going to be $1 billion a year. It is going to be as big as refining for them. Not every company has made this decision. ExxonMobil is still awful. I mean, and different companies have different strategies and they look at the world differently. But when you look at BP, they're looking at a longer view than ExxonMobil is. And hopefully that puts ExxonMobil out of business. Yes.
BP now stands for Beyond Petroleum.
That's right. That's what they're claiming. Beyond petroleum. Greenpeace don't believe them. I mean, but you know, and a lot of those kind of environmental groups think they ought to go a lot further. But boy, they've gone a long ways for who they are. So this is where I want to finish. When you look at something like producing biomass, when you look at making electricity from wind power, which we're doing in northern Iowa, you have to sort of wonder, is this, am I, if I'm interested in this, interested in something that's going to be a flash in the pan and 5 years from now we're not going to be doing any of this kind of stuff? Don't bet on it. In the long run, we have got to deal with global climate change. And when we do, we happen to live in a state that is in a position to do very, very well in helping out the Earth's biggest environmental problem we've ever come across, global climate change. There's going to be a market for that electricity that's produced by wind or biomass, and things are only going to get better. It's coming, folks, and we have to react to it, and there's a great way to react to it, and that is you can start making some money doing the right thing. Thank you.
Okay. Yes.
Coffee is here, ready, so I'm going to take a break.
Okay, if anybody wants to grab a fresh cup of coffee. The second batch of solar brewed coffee is ready. Our closer for today is Ed Woolsey. Ed was raised on a diversified farm in Decatur County. He became interested in energy during long days raking hay in the hot Iowa sun, followed by evenings of waiting in gasoline lines. It is likely the hot sun is responsible for his addiction to sustainable energy issues. His formal schooling included an advanced degree at the University of Iowa, where he worked on developing an integrated energy farm concept. He was the Renewable Program Coordinator for Iowa, or for the state of Iowa for 5 years, and has been involved in several wind projects, including the utility-scale wind turbine east of the Rocky Mountains. He has been senior consultant at Chariton Valley for past several years. He's president of Applied Agricultural Technologies Incorporated, a biomass equipment supply company, which is currently installing their first commercial small-scale ethanol plant in Nevada, Iowa. The company's near-term goal is to make their automated grain processing system a common value-added addition to farming operations. Ed believes in that it is important where value-added activities take place and who owns the facilities adding the value. Working together with Ed on the iRenew board has been a pleasure. I've learned a great deal from him. He's a thoughtful guy with a great sense of humor, and he's the lobbyist in Des Moines with the best collection of Paisley and Hawaiian shirts. Ed Woolsey.
Well, thank you. I just love Dave Osterberg. He's fun to listen to. He's a hard act to follow up on, though. I'm not even going to try on this. You know, good heavens, you know, you've listened to John Sellers, one of the best folks we have here on the Switchgrass, you know, and you've heard what a little bit about what the potential is here. Here in southern Iowa on Switchgrass, you've heard from Monica about methane digesters and livestock operations. You've read in the paper about what's going on with wind energy up in the northwestern part of the state, the north central part of the state, the western part of the state. $2,500 a year, indefinitely from a quarter acre of land for the use of these wind turbines. There's even greater potential if farmers own those wind turbines, like they do in northern Europe. We're going to get there. We'll get there. But you've heard from Dave here that for God's sakes we're screwing up the environment. It wasn't like I said. I was raised on a small farm over in Decatur County, and people that farm are pretty close to the land. They understand a lot about what the weather, what's going on, and one of the things that becomes real obvious if you talk to the older folks around in the community is that almost almost every single person you talk to will tell you that we're screwing up. The weather's different. The weather's changing. Talk to them. The weather's changing. That's anecdotal evidence. But what was it? 2 or 3 years ago, we had these straight winds that came through. This thing started on the west side of Des Moines. It was about 20 to 30 miles wide, 100+ mile an hour straight wind. Went north of Des Moines, up through Boone on the north side of Des Moines, came screaming across on the north side of Interstate 80, clear down by Amana, turned south, came through, tore up everything in Iowa City, clear on down here to Washington, Iowa. Took down probably 1,000 century-old barns. I saw a tree in Amana that was probably 4 foot in diameter, snapped off 12 foot above the ground. An incredible event. They called it a derecho. An event about the same, very similar, happened up in the boundary water areas of Minnesota a year later. We're seeing some strange things here with the climate. One of the things that's real hard that David touched on a little bit is for scientists to say with any certainty that these small events that we're seeing, these short-term events, are related to climate change. Statistically, we don't have enough years worth of data to be able to say with much confidence about events like that. But that's real serious when you live in an agricultural and an insurance state, because one thing about agriculture, it's very susceptible to those type of events. We have a 100+ degree period of a couple of weeks during pollination time when corn's pollinating, and it doesn't pollinate, and you don't have kernels of corn. If it's wet and we have a rainy April and they can't get in the field, we don't have corn crop. We're very susceptible to those type of changes in the climate, in short-term climate events like that. Not many people understand that what the potential impact may be to us. We may have the average annual rainfall, of 33 inches, 32 inches down here, 31 inches. But if it all happens in a 2-month period of time, we're not going to do real well. So we're screwing up the climate. We've got great potential for all these renewable energy technologies here in the state. We're a natural place for it. For God's sakes, why isn't it happening? Why aren't we doing it? You guys have got a little isolated. Your community down here has probably as much renewable energy, small-scale renewable energy, as any place within probably 5-state area. You've got quite a little bit going on down here, and you ought to be real proud of it. And you ought to capitalize on it, on the experiences of the people down here, and the momentum that you've got going on. Why isn't the rest of the state doing it? Why isn't the country doing it? Well, it has to do. It's about power. And when I say power, it's not about electricity power. It's about power. Who controls the power? Who has it? Where the vested interests are. Right now in Iowa, energy is a $6 billion industry. It's over $6 billion and growing. $6 billion. To put that in perspective, there's about 1 billion bushel worth of corn growing here in this state every year. If it's worth $2, $2.50, whatever, that's about $2.5 billion worth of corn in the whole corn industry here. Quite a little corn down here in southern Iowa. Probably more than what there ought to be. But that kind of gives you an idea. And you know how powerful agriculture is in this state. Well, you don't really hear about how powerful the energy industry is here in this state or in this country. I hope there's Republicans here. I hope we have a lot of Republicans here. You know, we need Republicans. We need Farm Bureau members. You know, these are the people that we really need to bring on board. Right now, I just read something on a website called Bushwatch. President, let's see, what is it? George Bushwatch, I think, is President Bushwatch. And Bush has selected his Energy Advisory Committee right now. There's about 57 people, if I remember right. In total, they've contributed over $8 million to the Republican Party and to President Bush's election efforts over the last several years. $8 million, okay? 57 people. There's about 45 of them or so that come from petroleum industry, that come from the uranium mining industry, that come from the electric industry, okay? From the energy efficiency industry, there's one. From the renewable energy industry, there's none. And from consumer action, there's one out of Texas. Okay, now I might be a little cynical, but it looks to me like we're not going to do real well in terms of what we ought to be expecting at the federal level to come down to renewable energy efforts. So it's kind of be up to what's going on here in Iowa. Okay. What's going on at the Capitol right now? Well, there's been a deregulation effort here at the Capitol for several years. Some of you may have been following that somewhat. Utility companies basically want to get the government off their backs. You know, it was defeated again last year through quite a coalition of groups that organized it against it. It didn't feel it was in the best interest. California deregulated it. We see how successful that they are right now. We may be heading in the same direction. It's very possible. There's some legislation that the utilities are putting forward this year. If it's done right, it may put us in exactly the same situation that California is in right now. Now, California, the situation there, you know, it's not bad at all. It's not bad at all if you're an owner of those generation facilities. Because they're striking some real good deals for electricity. And what you run into is you run into a parent company, which is a utility company, and a non-rate regulated subsidiary of those parent companies that are wholly owned by the utility company. What they've done is they've transferred the ownership of the generation to the subsidiary companies and writing sweetheart contracts with the parent corporations for the electricity, transferring all the money down here to these wholly owned subsidiaries and outside corporations. You know, if we don't keep a close eye on what's going on in this state, we could be running into the same thing. I was going to be short on generation capacity in 2003 is what the Iowa Utility Board says. We need new generation in this state. We're probably going to need new coal-fired generation. As bad as I hate to say that, it would be real easy to see that entire new generation being taken up by renewable energy and energy efficiency. Science is there. We've got reports. There's reports back here that we just put out by Environmental Law and Policy Center out of Chicago that show that with a relatively small investment in this state, and we're talking less than $2 a month on your annual energy bill, we could actually reduce the amount of energy that we need in the future here in Iowa and take up to 20% of that from renewable energy sources with less than $2 a month. You know, we're going to be addressing rural economic development. You're going to have a third crop for agricultural commodities. If you had a third crop down here, how many farmers? Do we have any farmers? Anybody? Landowners? Got a few. Good. You know, a third crop, if you had a third potential crop out there versus corn and soybeans and CRP, you know, you've got something that you can trade off on that. It's going to raise the price of corn. It's going to raise the price of soybeans. You know, it's going to do a lot for economic development as well as water quality. You know, you're all on rural water down here, Rathbun Regional. You know, switchgrass can help clean up the quality of the water in there. You know, and there's nothing like reducing chances of tumors, you know, to start your day out right. You know, it's about power. You don't have it. You know, do you have a lobbyist? Do you guys lobby? Do you go up to the Capitol or, you know, you got to be active. It's about power. When we discuss an issue, say this siding bill that we're working on this year, the utility companies have between between 12, usually either 10 or 12 lobbyists there. And these are good guys. Well, I don't mean good like nice guys. These are smart people. These are expensive suits. These are articulate individuals. They're good, and they spread around a lot of money. Election time, these guys are spreading money. And I'm telling you, that's the reality of that political world up there. The reason that we have the wind farms up in northwestern Iowa is because of legislation. It's because of legislation in this state that required it. David right here was a key architect of that. If he hadn't been there, he probably wouldn't have had it. And the reason that we have the methane projects in the state is because Monica there in the DNR, they've pulled in some federal money to do that. Our Switchgrass project here that John talked about, it's running on Department of Energy money. These are all legislatively demanded or mandated efforts. So you've got to get active. You've got to get up and do something. You've got to go to these coffee shops where these knotheads down there are talking about, global climate change not being real. They're talking about, whoa, I don't burn ethanol. Well, duh. If you're not going to burn your own product, use your own product that you're producing, how do you expect anybody else to? And you'd be amazed how many times I've heard this. You've got to join these organizations. I'm not getting paid by a big corporation for being in Des Moines. I'm getting a little money from the Union of Concerned Scientists, a consumer organization, and volunteers. The only way we can that we can offset the power of these big money corporations, if we can, is for you folks to get up there and become active. You've got to talk to your political representatives. You've got to send them postcards. Michelle's back in the back, at the back table back here. If you don't know who your political representative is, she can tell you. She's got self-addressed cards here that's been supplied by one of the other citizens groups here that's part of this organization putting this thing on. There's a lot of people here that are trying to help, trying to show people the right direction. But you can't, you're not going to fight the kind of power that's aligned against you. Without your active involvement, there's 100 different ways that you can become active and help the situation. You've got to find out what you can do. What can you do specifically that's going to help what we need, what everybody understands that we need to be doing.
They all have an email address. That's the easiest way. You don't even need to put a postcard in.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. You can get on the state legislative email website there and go directly to your legislator with an email. Load up 2 or 3. I'll tell you, you'd be amazed how important it is for a carload of folks, of real people from out here in the countryside to come up to the Capitol there and start knocking on doors there and looking for somebody to talk to. Because those guys really do pay attention when somebody comes up there in boots and a flannel shirt, that's, this is a voter. This is the real deal. So, do something like that. It doesn't take much, but do something.
The email also works because I had another issue about the census. They're starting a new thing for census, and my mother-in-law got one, an elderly lady. And so I emailed every representative we had, and they all got back to me, and one of them went extra length to find out about the issue and do. So emails really do work with the legislators. They do respond to them and get back to you.
Yeah, they do. There's, like I said, there's 50 different ways that you can become active on this issue and move it forward. Paying attention to what's going on with our Switchgrass project over here, and doing some education on your local level. Get on local radio programs. Talk to them. Just talk to people downtown. We're working on a real win-win scenario here for everybody involved. And it doesn't make any sense to let this opportunity pass us by. So if there's one thing that I want to instill in you, it's how important just a handful of people becoming active can be. Really makes a difference, and that's what we need to do. We need to make a difference and get something done here. We see the opportunity and the rationale for doing it. So I want to thank you. That's about all I have, and I'll be glad to answer questions.
Great, thanks, all of you. Great presentations. We'll have a few minutes for questions. Gold, blue ribbon panel here.
I can see a lot of good things about burning switchgrass and even possibly ethanol, but those both put carbon dioxide into the air too. What do we gain in terms of increasing or decreasing carbon dioxide by burning those things instead of coal? You know, it seems like we're still in the same basket.
As it was mentioned before, these are cycling the CO2 that's here now that you can touch. When you use petroleum, when you use coal, that was prehistoric. That's adding on to the burden that our atmosphere is carrying.
The grass that you're using, the grass that we burn, takes up carbon dioxide during the plant growing cycle during the year. Same amount of carbon it pulls out of the atmosphere is what is given up either when you burn it or when you can do the conversion process into ethanol.
So it's not making it worse.
No,
At least it's
no.
not making it better, but at least it's not making
Well,
it worse.
it is making it better because part of the other is being sequestered
A
underground.
certain amount of it.
Yeah,
At least for switchgrass, but not in the corn.
probably right.
What state or federal laws exist for making the utility companies buy the electricity, especially wind power produced? Is it 100% or does that?
Oh, boy.
Sorry. Sorry for the chuckle there. Iowa state law currently requires utilities to allow you to net meter, which would mean that that your system at your home or your farm would allow the meter to run backwards when you're producing energy and the meter to run forward when you're buying. At the end of a certain period, either the billing period or the year, you get together with the utility and either they owe you money or you owe them money, and it's netted out. That's been challenged in the district court and is now at the Supreme Court. The utilities don't want to net meter. They want for you to pay the retail rate for your generation, and then they want to buy your generation at the avoided cost, which is about 1.5 to 2 cents a kilowatt hour. So it's up to the Supreme Court right now, and that remains to be seen.
What does that apply though for businesses, or is this just private?
It applies for anybody.
The school, for instance, Monica talked about the Spirit Lake schools. They net meter with Alliant. And Alliant agreed to that back in probably 94. But now it's more difficult. Mid-American especially is really bad on this. Alliant's a little bit better than them. I mean, Alliant's actually doing some stuff with switchgrass. But 30 states have net metering laws, and it's only being challenged in Iowa. So this Supreme Court case is a very big deal, and we have to win it.
Is it on the docket? Is it scheduled?
No, not yet.
How soon do you think it'll, there's no idea?
The Utilities Board and the Office of the Consumer Advocate are the ones challenging the district court's ruling, and they don't know yet when it'll be placed on the docket.
So basically, until that case is decided, Alliant and Mid-America won't allow any further hookups? Is that what that they're stalling? And not allowing people to do it?
Not necessarily. Alliant, I've had 3 or 4 interconnect agreements for schools doing wind turbines through Alliant, and their interconnect agreements are favorable, just as we talked about with the net metering process, until the Supreme Court rules, and then that'll be dependent upon what the Supreme Court says. Haven't been successful in getting those same kind of agreements out of Mid-American. So depends on what utility you're working with. And if you're working with a municipal utility, then it really just depends. Most municipal utilities have been much more favorable to net metering than the investor-owns.
Is that U.S. Supreme Court or state Supreme Court?
State.
Switchgrass, can it ever get to the point where it's completely organically grown, or?
We feel like it can. We definitely feel. Mother Nature did it for a few thousand years.
There's actually a bacteria that's a nitrogen fixing bacteria that they've discovered that can actually fix nitrogen from the atmosphere directly to the plant. We're not doing any research in it right now, but we should, and we probably will in the future. But that would solve that issue.
Monica made a statement that I hope you didn't quite mean. You said that solar is very expensive. If you include solar water heating, that is very favorable, and it is very inexpensive if you want. I have a system I installed last year. I was able to turn my regular water heater off for 9 months in Fairfield. And that system cost about $800. So please don't get trapped into believing that everything that is alternative energy is expensive. It isn't.
That's an important point, and that'll allow me to make another point. There are some applications of solar that are very cost effective, and that's what our study throughout the Midwest, we're going to try to show builders and developers that that's true, that there are some applications. And you also made a second point that not all renewable applications are more expensive. I wish I had this on a graph to hand out to every one of you. But new generation, Ed talked about the fact that we're going to need new generation in this state. We have to decide where we're going to get that from. New generation from traditional fossil fuels, natural gas or coal, is going to cost us about 4 to 10 cents a kilowatt hour. Renewable energy, we know that Florida Power and Light is developing some wind energy that they're going to sell at 2.8 cents a kilowatt hour. Biomass can be around 8 cents a kilowatt hour. So already we know that renewables are cheaper than new generation. Energy efficiency is the cheapest at about 2.5 cents a kilowatt hour. And so even if you look at things only from an economic perspective, what we're talking about here today is much cheaper than new generation.
There's also the fact that traditional conventional fuels, if you're talking about the cost of coal and natural gas and nuclear, none of those costs factor in the environmental cleanup.
Right.
Right.
If you were to factor that into the equation, there would be no argument that all renewable systems of energy generation are by far cheaper than conventional systems.
Can you elaborate a little more on the difference in cost between the wind generator, the big farms, compared to coal-fired, excluding the external costs? Why aren't more windmill farms being put in then if it's cheaper?
Let me take a shot. Let me take a shot at that. One of the major problems, is how we subsidize coal right now. You know, we subsidize the rail lines. Well, let's start with the mining. We subsidize the land that the mines are located on. We subsidize the technology involved in mining operations with accelerated depreciation schedules, direct subsidies, research and development subsidies. We subsidize the transport of the coal to the facilities across the Midwest. We subsidize the actual conversion process, and we subsidize the research and development that goes into power plant construction and development. We subsidize the depreciation schedules for those power plants. You know, we're subsidizing that. That industry is old. They've put a lot of money into the political process for a lot of years. It's not a level playing field. You know, and what they want to do then is they want to bring any kind of new renewable technology out there, and they say, well, boy, we don't want to subsidize you. We want a level playing field. But they don't count these literally billions and billions of dollars in subsidies that have gone into getting that fossil fuel as cheap as where it is right now.
In addition to that, the grid that takes energy wherever it needs to go has been developed by the investor-owned utilities primarily. And so it's designed to serve from the coal plant to wherever the houses are right now. So if you build a wind turbine out where there isn't a connection to the grid, doing that interconnection may be very expensive or even impossible depending on who you're talking with and how you're making it happen. And if you have to go over several different systems to get that electricity to where it needs to go, then the cost of transportation of that electricity increases. And so dealing with even just the transmission system is a very important part of renewable energy policy.
Are you saying in that transmission system that the transportation of electricity, if you will, the challenge with that is technological, or is the problem more political?
It's the latter.
Yeah.
Apparently they talk about line bandits out there. The Babich Municipal Utilities put together a 3-unit wind farm up at Algona. One of the main owners, though, was Cedar Falls Municipal Utility, and that's 100 miles. The power was coming out of there very cheap, 2 or 3 cents kilowatt hour, and it was up to around 10 cents before it got to Cedar Falls. That's the line bandits along there. Not technological. You lose 10% of your electricity on lines. There's line loss, but it's nothing like what the people who happen to own something can charge. And let me take my, the answer to your question about, why utility companies aren't doing it. The reason that the utility companies had to buy the power from those 300 and some wind turbines, 300, 200-foot towers with big 80-foot blades, they paid 3.5 cents a kilowatt hour for that power. Now we know that. No one will tell you that, but that's the answer. And if you say, is that the answer, they'll say, we can't tell you, but it is. It's 3.5 cents. It starts out higher, but then over 20 years it goes down, and it's because of financing that the two firms, Florida Power and Light and Enron Corporation, need. Now, where does that fit in with present production? Present production from old coal plants that have been around for a long time and are all depreciated and got your money out of is maybe 2.4 cents per kilowatt hour in Iowa, probably closer to 2. Nukes are more expensive. When we were playing last year on this deregulation bill, Mid-American kept saying, we can build a new gas-fired combined cycle, new technology plant over where we have one of our old nukes on the Mississippi River, and that's only got to be 3 cents a kilowatt hour, and you're charging 3.5 for that wind. The wind's too expensive. That was when natural gas prices were $2.50 per million BTUs. It just went to 7. They think it's going to level out closer to 5. The price now has jumped for that plant closer to 4 to 4.5 cents. It is the cheapest. Why won't they do it? Why is, Sir John Brown, a good a good executive of an oil company, looking forward, and whoever's running ExxonMobil is just a dumbbell? Well, we just happen to have too many dumbbells in our utility infrastructure. That's a technical term, but I think you understand.
Don't use it without proper certification.
Monica or anybody, I'd like to know if you've come across many RECs that are letting people, not putting blocks up against people that want to tie in and do net metering in Iowa. And even from now until this court case is decided, and no matter how it's decided, what can we do to get our RECs to cooperate and work together and work with the communities to get something positive accomplished? A lot of people are investing a lot of money and thinking, well, it's the law, they have to let me do this, and they're not letting me tie in.
Well, the answer to your first question is no. There aren't a lot of RECs that are doing net metering, and I'm not aware of any interconnect agreements I've seen through RECs. But I heard Ed say something about how you can work on that.
Yeah. The best way you can deal with the RECs is get on the board. Run for the board. People don't like to be on the boards of RECs, and they don't understand how powerful what the impact of these decision-making processes are. Run for the board, get on the board, go to the meetings. They usually have quite an expense account. They'll feed you well, and maybe give you a trip or two, during the year. Run. That's how you make the change. Get on the board. Because just one person on the board is going to make a difference. 2 people, you're going to own the board.
There is one company here that actually is somewhat open, and they have a positive chairman of the board and also the CEO. I happen to be communicating with both of them, and they are willing to be educated and to make some changes. So if one more person was on the board there, it would make a tremendous difference.
And it would. I used to be a state representative, as you know, and I used to go to these REC meetings, and one that I would go to, I never saw a woman on that board. I never saw a person who wasn't seemingly in his 70s on that board. I mean, there's got to be some openings for sure on a board like that. And there are lots of different folks out there. We have in the state one of the best utility executives any place, and he runs a municipal utility up in Waverly. Glenn Cannon has done more. Their total system is pushing up towards 7% renewable. They bought 2 of the big wind turbines way up at that Storm Lake 259 unit plant. And they also have a little bit of hydro, and they have their own wind machine outside of town. Some people really believe this. And it's almost like who you get breaking up through that ceiling to become the chief executive officer. Because what I tried to show you is you don't have to just be an environmentalist to want to do this kind of thing. You have to have a longer view of where things are going to be. And if you have that longer view, I think you choose to be more environmental, because that's where we're going. We got to respond, and when you respond, you make money by doing the right thing.
When they have these wind generators, I mean, how reliable? I mean, because Americans, when they get home from work, want to flip the light on, they want it to come on. So, you know, I live in Iowa too, and I know the wind blows a lot, but it doesn't always blow.
We won't, nobody is saying we're going to be 100% dependent on wind. You know, nobody is saying that. But what we can do, and what the Europeans have shown, is that we can get probably up to 20% of our generation capacity from wind. When the wind doesn't blow, when we have periods of low wind time, we'll use other generation sources. Biomass is a natural. You know,
that's what I can see, but I know, I mean, as a businessman raising a farm and the banker wants to see a profit, I mean, their position is raising energy, and in the past, that has been the most reliable, because they can always dig coal and they can always do it. Now that needs to change, but you know, I'm sitting here going, you know, 99% of Americans, when they want to go home, they, well, gosh, the wind didn't blow today and I haven't got any juice or something like that. But I wouldn't have any problem if I mean, I've got 240 acres I can put up a wind generation farm on, but I wouldn't expect them to buy my power at the same price I pay for it. I mean, that's just not business. I hope what I buy as a resource I can turn into a profit. I mean, that's how I live. I mean, you know, on your farm, you know, you wouldn't do that. So I wouldn't expect the power companies to pay me penny for penny, but, you know, because they don't, you know, that's just...
Wind power is what they call non-dispatchable, which means you can't rely on it.
Right.
Okay, and it will have a little lower value than something like biomass, which you can rely on, or something like coal. Mm-hmm. But actually what we're finding is that actually the reliability or capacity factor, which is a percentage indicator of reliability, is not 100% with coal or nuclear plants.
Well, no.
You know, it's lower too.
All the time too.
You know, so
I've had friends that work, I mean, they're always down. They're always going down for, I don't know what they do, but they're always shutting down for something. I don't know why.
That's right. And your utility always has a certain amount of requirement, of demand. You know, so there's no reason that demand, a percentage of that demand, can't be met with something like wind. You know, it has a value.
So is the new technology, you need storage facilities to some? Is that?
There's work going on all over the world on storage.
I mean,
that's the reason they built the
fuel
steel
cells.
That's the reason they built the steel barns for the Switchgrass project.
Well, yeah, but I mean
storage for electricity.
Well,
yeah.
one of the
so when there
ideas that's
isn't.
Or partly fuel cells.
If you don't mind my jumping in here yet, one of the ideas that's been floated for wind energy, there are two, is to tie a wind generator in with a fuel cell system that can store electricity at site to be released and reconverted, you know, through the operation of fuel cell, basically splitting water into hydrogen and oxygen, and then recombining it. It creates current every time you do it. So that's one idea, and the other is take those wind generators and produce hydrogen gas and pipeline it to plants where it can be burned to make electricity. That's one aspect of it. But as Ed said, it's a mix. That's what we're talking about. And you know, anyone who lives in the country knows that, you know, 9 or so months out of the year in Iowa, we've got good wind. You know, it's late summer when it dies down, which has always plagued us at iRenew, because we've usually had our renewable energy fairs in late summer, early fall, and we put up these wind generators to show people the wind generators, and everyone comes out for the weekend fair, and they look up the tower, and the thing's not moving. But the rest of the year, it's pretty good. It's pretty good. And another thing about technology is the wind generators, as we go along, we're now, what, Ed, you correct me on this, we're probably in the third or fourth generation of wind turbines, and they're more efficient all the time, and they're able to produce energy in lower winds all the time. The big generators up in the northwest part of the state, all they need is 15 to 16 mile an hour sustainable winds to be productive, to be commercially viable. The northwest part of Jefferson County has average wind speeds of 14 to 15 miles per hour. So it's on the edge of being a commercially viable area for a large-scale wind turbine. But the smaller scale turbines, you can go, I mean, drive around Jefferson County and see how many people have got towers up powering their houses. There's quite a few. And they're using, 1,000 or 3,000 watt generators like this, storing their electricity in batteries. They're completely off the grid, and they're doing fine. I know a fellow up north of town, just north of town, who's got he's got a 1,500 watt solar system that Michael and John put in, and just this last year put up a 3,000 watt wind generator with his neighbor, and he hadn't had to run his propane backup generator at all this winter.
And his wind generator is not running very much.
Well, I know, because the batteries are always cranked up.
Yeah, when it is running, it's throwing the excess in the batteries, so the batteries then are providing what he needs. And
right.
Yeah, maybe just to follow up on that, because talking about selling, the price being the same. Now that's a subsidy, there's no question about that. The reason you do it is you do it for small units. You're not going to do it for those big wind farms, because you also get some more reliability out of bringing on some power clear near the end of where that line is. Just like that methane generator that Monica was talking about, does a lot more than just produce kilowatt hours. It also gives you some extra reliability that you ought to be willing to pay something for. But I think that everybody recognizes that this net generation, this net metering process, is part of a subsidy, but it's moving us with smaller units forward, because that's where we need to be going. We need more reliability. So that you can say is a subsidy, and whether it offsets all the other subsidies we give to the other energy or not, I don't know. But it is, and it's a fight you get in to find out. You have to get into that fight in order to push that industry forward.
Well, I would argue that you're wrong. Because when you get into peak,